So hello out there to everyone in TV land. My name is Barry Threw. I'm the Executive Director with the Gray Area Foundation for the Arts. We are a 21st century countercultural hub that is cultivating communities of practice, applying creative action towards social transformation, which includes interdisciplinary approaches, including art, science, technology, and the humanities, applied towards some of our biggest challenges in the world. And so in line with that mission, we're very happy to be presenting this panel focused on universal basic income as part of the GRID's Exposure Art Policy Technology Days. Thanks to the unique partners for putting this thing together. And this is also the third edition of the Nodes Art Plus Tech Encounters series, also run by Unique. Super excited for our panelists and the topic today. We have with us Sarah Friend, developer with CirclesUBI, who's from Canada, but coming to us from Berlin. Liv O'Donoghue, who's representing Ireland's National Campaign for the Arts here today. Anne Price in Oakland, who's the president of the Insight Center for Community Economic Development. Sandino Scheidegger, who's coming to us from Switzerland and is the founder of the Social Income Project. And Cara Defabio, who will moderate for us today, who is the Special Initiatives Director of the Economic Security Project. And I'd like to just start this panel on a little bit of a personal note, which is a part of Gray Area's community, a large part of it is creative technologists. And unfortunately, we lost one of our community this week, JT Nimoy, who was a absolutely genius programmer and thinker and all around wonderful and brilliant person, died this week, and notably to our discussion, had struggled for the last several years with a range of health issues, as well as homelessness, was running several GoFundMes as well as trying to pick up work. So was definitely in line with this, what we keep saying is this artist entrepreneurial model that's going to, be a new model for the arts and culture, but ended up sadly being overcome by these structural problems that don't provide a safety net for the arts and culture. So, I'm just adding that because as we talk about economic models and support for arts and culture in cities like San Francisco particularly, it's good to unpack how things like universal basic income could be helpful in certain ways in similar situations. And, we'll miss JT a lot. So with that preface, I'll pass it over to Cara. And thanks so much, everyone, for being here and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Barry. Yes, and I think it's a fitting discussion in JT's memory. And if you all haven't checked out their work, you should definitely go check out their website. It's still up and beautiful. So another acknowledgement, I'm coming to you live from Oakland, California, where we have multiple disasters happening right now. And so I just want to acknowledge that it's a crazy world that we're living in. And thank you for joining me here on the panel. And thank you for joining us here in the audience. And definitely just want to extend the invitation to come as you are. We know that everyone's dealing with a lot right now. And I'm excited to talk a little bit about some policy structures that might help support artists through difficult times, just like this. So I think what we should do first is just introduce ourselves. And Sarah, will you start for us?
Sure. Hi, everybody, and nice to meet those of you who I haven't already met. My name is Sarah Friend, and I work on a project called CirclesUBI, which is it's universal basic income-like, but I also like to describe it to people as being a community currency that contains wealth redistribution as one of its mechanisms. And maybe we can talk a little more about that, or it'll come up in our discussions. We've been testing our app. It's an app, it's digital, since January here in Berlin, and we're gearing up for our public launch in October. And we'll be announcing more details of that at the Berlin Basic Income March this weekend. I'm a software developer on the team. I don't normally speak publicly for Circles, but I'm also an artist. So I think that adds some context to me being on this panel.
Thank you so much. Look forward to hearing a little bit more about that as we start to discuss. I feel like maybe we can go somewhat geographically and touch in with Sandino next.
Yes. Hello, everybody. My name is Sandino. I work for Social Income, which is, as Sarah said as well, kind of UBI-like. It's paying out universal basic incomes to people in need in Sierra Leone, directly to the phone of the recipient. And it's paid by people who donate or contribute 1% of their income. And within the pilot phase, it was we kind of kept it within the art world, meaning we paid out artists in Freetown, Sierra Leone, and we gathered the money by asking people working in the arts for big museums, for example, to donate 1% of their income. And that's a bit the project. I think we can talk more about it later.
Thank you, Sandino. Next up, Liv.
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for having me on the panel. I hope you can all hear me and see me okay. I'm actually in a cabin deep in the woods in Norway, so I'm keeping my fingers crossed that this Wi-Fi holds out. So yeah, I'm mainly an actress and a theatre maker, but I also work in a voluntary capacity for the National Campaign for the Arts in Ireland. And so the NCFA is a grassroots organisation run by a voluntary steering committee and a number of coordinators that are sort of throughout the country. And we were established in 2009. And I guess our main sort of remit is to make sure that the arts are on local and national government agendas. We focus largely on policy analysis, research, lobbying, advocacy, and basically trying to make a case for the arts in Ireland and for, I guess, trying to lift artists out of the precarity that they're living in. So that's us.
That sounds like a plan.
Yeah.
Figure it out. Okay, and Anne.
Hi, everyone. I'm coming to you from Oakland, California, where we're in the midst of a lot of wildfires and smoke. I'm president of the Insight Center for Community Economic Development.
Hey, Anne, your sound is coming in and out a little bit. Luckily, Anne and I have worked very close together for a long time, and I can kind of help fill in the blanks here. So Anne is president of the Insight Center for Community Economic Development here in Oakland, and works on a host of different issues, including the racial wealth gap and policies like a basic income or a guaranteed income, and is really kind of stand out in the work that she does around centering Blackness and centering narrative, and how we need to shift the narrative around deservedness to make the case for a basic income. And so Anne and I mentioned that we had worked together. I work for an organization called the Economic Security Project. And we are a network of, philanthropists, culture makers, policy wonks, economists, academics, storytellers, and we try to advance a guaranteed income here in the United States. And we also have started more recently, working on anti-monopoly issues against corporate concentration. And so I'm so pleased to be in conversation with you all here today. A little bit more background. I myself am a theater artist. I grew up in San Francisco. And so these issues kind of intertwining are right, very, very dear to my heart. And so I'm excited to be kind of talking with you all today. I think one way in that I'd be interested in hearing is how you all came to the idea of a basic income or the idea of a guaranteed income in the work that you were doing. Sandino.
I can start, of course. So if you listen around your circle of friends, you always hear like everybody cheering for more equality, but then at one point you also feel like it's just difficult to engage, and how do you kind of start? And so on one side you have the people who want to help or close the gap. At the other hand, you have the people who are in need. And then it's a question of how to bring those things together. And I think that's where the technology comes also in, and we can provide a platform to actually redistribute. And that's a bit with like the personal motivation and the arts, of course. Why are we working within the arts? It's my background is also in the arts. It's just easier to kind of start a project, because otherwise all those UBI ideas and projects, at least within Europe or Switzerland, they were always kind of utopian, and people also kind of shut them down quickly, even the arguments, because you just don't know what is shifting if you exchange one system for the other. And living in Switzerland, where there is kind of a safety net which works, all the people are just too kind of afraid to exchange that with a new system which has its uncertainties. And so that's why we kind of started to look at the wealth gap and seeing in Sierra Leone, you do have a large part of the population which live in extreme or in poverty. And with the money you can generate within the global north, being 1% of your salary, you can actually do quite a lot, because in average, one person, at least in the country I grew up, can kind of cover 2 basic incomes per month in Sierra Leone, which is kind of a big responsibility, and I think a good thing to do.
And Sandino, what was it about the cash? Like, because I think a lot of times people think about helping those specifically in other countries, like with food or shelter or art supplies or education. Mm-hmm. What was it about cash that seemed to kind of solve for the problems that you were seeing?
So cash is actually one of the very proven system, like direct cash, one of the proven system in development aid. Also because what people in poverty, they do know how to use money actually better than we do probably. And if you ask ourselves, what would we want in a situation in which they are, we would also say like we want to have the freedom to use the help for the things we need most, and they can decide best how to use it. And cash, of course, has the advantage also to be sent even in now the crisis during the COVID. For us, it was no difference, because cash can be sent digitally and all the way to the phone of the recipient. And then the last part, turning it into cash, is actually a system which is widely already used in Africa, which is the mobile money. So we actually kind of building up on existing infrastructure, and we kind of merge those ideas of universal basic income, direct cash, and put that together and use something which already exists, which is mobile banking, because most people wouldn't have a bank account anyway. And maybe just the difference between the universal basic income, that's why also I said UBI-like, is normally is provided by the state or the government. And in this case, it's a person-to-person relationship. Of course, the people paying the contributing is not knowing to whom exactly they pay, but it's still a person-to-person business and it's built up on solidarity.
I love that. Maybe it makes sense to go to Sarah next, just in terms of that person to person. I feel like that really speaks to what Circles is trying to build. And so if you want to just talk a little bit about how you came to a basic income, this kind of like community built model.
For sure, but maybe following what Sandino was saying about the way his platform is crowdfunded, it might also be interesting to mention that Berlin, independently from Circles and what my team is doing, is actually also running a basic income pilot. Not Berlin, I think Germany, all of Germany as a whole, Mein Grundeinkommen, a basic income pilot that is also crowdfunded and is currently accepting applicants to redistribute that money to a pool of chosen people. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this project goes. In terms of Circles and what brought me to Circles, it's never only one thing. I'm not the founder or initiator of the idea of Circles. I'm a person who joined the team and chose to work on it. And for me, I think that actually comes from an interest in money itself, which sounds like a weird thing maybe to be interested in. I think most people think money is maybe quite boring. But I think that's because many of us are only exposed to a very narrow vision of what money can be, how money can work. And when I first heard of Circles, I think I was excited by the fact that it was using new things that were newly enabled by technology to actually rethink what money could be and how money could move. And so Circles, it's similarly maybe to these crowdfunded basic incomes in that it's not a project supported by the state. It's a project that is can grow within a community and be supported by a community. And it passes and grows along social relationships. So it's not crowdfunded, but we are connected to and supporting others when using it. I don't want to get too into the weeds about how that works, but I can if there's interest.
Okay, I think I should just pause here to remind everybody watching that you can hop into the comments and let us know if you want Sarah to get into the nitty-gritty technical details of how CirclesUBI is built. We'd be more than happy to do that. So Liv or Anne, I don't know which of you kind of are moved to speak, but just this idea of like what brought you to cash as a solution in the work that you do.
I'm happy to jump in, or Anne, do you want to go ahead?
Go ahead.
So yeah, I guess for us at the NCFA, I suppose UBI has we've arrived at UBI as a sort of, I suppose, a salve for many problems facing artists. So in Ireland, 72% of artists are earning less than the minimum wage. And on a recent study we did, 89% are living in financial uncertainty. We also have huge problems with, for example, familial dependency, meaning lots of people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds don't stick it out as artists get older. It becomes unsustainable to live in such precariousness, so they're dropping out. So we were looking for ways to keep artists in the system. And I suppose it's worth saying so many artists are reliant on social welfare already, but it's a system that isn't designed with us in mind. And I think that leads to huge mental health problems, and there's also a sort of a general public sense of artists being scroungers and that sort of thing. So I suppose we arrived at UBI as a sort of a way of, I suppose, looking for something that was universal, that didn't have artists as something exceptional or sort of special, that we were kind of getting sort of this free money, but that it was for everyone. And so it was a way of, I suppose, protecting our artists, but also trying to keep our artists within society as well. Because the arts are so fundamental to a functioning, healthy society, which I think we really learned through COVID-19 in particular. You know, the arts were such a salve. You know, they really saved us. The books, the TVs, movies, you know, all of the art that we were consuming during lockdown. I think it just proved how important it is to a healthy, functioning modern society. So yeah, UBI was a way of kind of helping us all to get a leg up, to be on a sort of equal footing with the rest of society.
Thank you. Yeah. I know we here in California are still in the midst of the pandemic, and I'm starting to get nervous I'm going to run out of TV shows. So I totally hear you. And I don't know if we should check your sound, if it's back.
Yeah, I hope you can hear me. Is that better? Okay, great. Sorry about all those glitches here. You know, I was really drawn to UBI, not only because of growing economic precarity, but just here in the US, narratives around deservedness, which really drive so much of how we make political decisions, and really what that means to ordinary folks. And I think certainly for artists, you know, to be not able to have to take on 2 or 3 jobs, to not to worry, as Liv talked about, like the mental stress and worry about making ends meet and really being able to really do your craft, I think makes a huge difference. For me, I'm really intrigued about narratives around deservedness, and I really see arts as being critical to helping us um, really come up with counter narratives that could fundamentally change in the US how we think about poverty, how we think about people who are really living on the edge. So for me, it's both of those things.
Absolutely. Thank you. Cool. So I guess maybe we can get in a little bit to these ideas of like how this would work, how it's working right now, and the work that you're doing, Sandino, and also for you, Sarah, the models that you're employing. And then we can talk a little bit more broadly about some of the things that are happening here in the United States and happening with artist support during COVID, because I think that could be a model for us moving forward as well. Sandino, if you want to just kind of like, I feel like you already stepped us through, you have people that are contributing part of their income. How does it work on the ground for the people who are receiving the basic income?
So on the ground, of course, we have somebody on site in Freetown who helps us also to distribute the money. And so it's actually very simple. It comes every month on the 15th. So actually tomorrow, after tomorrow, it arrives on the cell phone of all the recipients, and then they can use it's unconditional for whatever they want to use it. And that's basically it. Of course, we do have some feedback mechanism. We talk to them. We're also part of a group, kind of a group chat, which keeps like all the. I always think that the long-term effect is also that people, even though at one point probably there is no basic income anymore, then they would still have the connections which they actually start making at the moment by talking to other artists. And Freetown has, for example, no museums or art spaces which artists can even go. There's no art school, of course. And so you don't even have this ecosystem where you can kind of talk to other like-minded people. I think this is also a big part of the project, even though we kind of keep that separate a bit. Also to have social income as really being a straightforward tool to use, and also kind of getting the money from people who always kind of bring up the argument that if you pay to NGO, which normally has an overhead between 40 and or 60%, between 40 and 60%, where you have now the possibility to pay 100% of your contribution goes to a person's phone, which is I think interesting as an argument also to kind of get other people involved. And at the moment, we're still in the arts, but just now we're actually breaking out of this art circle just also to see how far we can get, because I believe personally it shouldn't be a project which is only for artists, also in the thinking and philosophy of UBI, that everybody deserves it, but we just try to prioritize people in need, of course, but also in the beginning we set it up with artists because that's the persons we think it's possible to set up the whole system.
And I'm curious, like, what kinds of, how are people using this money, and like, what kind of effect have you seen it have in the people's lives who are receiving the social income?
So sadly, during the crisis, we also got the feedback that some people really depend only on this money. That is good and bad, of course, but then there's another kind of ethical question: how much data or information you want to gather from the people, what they use the money for. I'm a big advocate of not getting too much data, because it is already proven. There's many different studies as well that people who do get a monthly stipend for a long term, in our case, it's 3 years for the moment, everybody is guaranteed a basic social income. And to not getting too much data of saying exactly what they use it for, because this is somehow also already proven. And I think if we always keep up the flag of data privacy, we should also respect it towards others.
Absolutely. But I mean, I'm just kind of curious, are they continuing to produce art, or are they like, I don't know, is it something that people have?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there is this parallel discussion with the artists, of course, where they also share when they do art, what kind of art they do, and they're also planning to set up the first independent art space in Freetown. So there's things happening, which is also paid through the money of social income. But it's somehow, I think this is something which is happening, and I am very much informed because they're all artists, and we're in a contact and in a direct contact. But in the future, I think we won't know exactly what they use the money for, because also it's not on an app, because a lot of people don't have the smartphones either. So the whole mobile money, it's work with the old Nokia phones, as we know. And so you wouldn't know what they spend it for. It's not like us who pay with always with the phone or with a credit card, and then you could kind of see what they use it for. I think that's not the path we want to take.
I agree with you. I think that tracking all of that just kind of plays into the idea that people aren't going to spend it properly or correctly, whatever that means. But it is also interesting to note how that kind of regular income can really impact people's sense of security and ease of mind. And so I'm always curious to know how knowing that you're going to receive that income steadily might make you more open to, participating in your practice in a different capacity than you would be able to if you were really worried about where your next paycheck was coming from. And I think that's kind of what you were talking about a little bit, Liv, and just this idea that when you're living kind of precariously, this myth of the starving artist, like how can we eradicate that so that it's like, no, actually, you don't have to be starving to make good art.
No, and I think we'll make better art if we're free. No? I think there's a lot of great art ahead.
I hope so as well.
I think just to follow from that of the precarity of not knowing when more money is coming. I think this is maybe tied to the previous question of reasons you work on the project you work on. I'm from Canada originally, though I live in Germany now. And Canada has done 2 UBI pilots. One, which is very famous, I think many people watching might know it. It was in the 1970s. But one only a couple years ago in a city near my hometown. And this pilot was put in by one of our more left-wing political parties. There was an electoral system change, and then the pilot was canceled. And much like you said, Cara, it was absolutely heartbreaking to read the testimonies from the people who had been enrolled in this pilot. after it had been canceled. They'd been receiving it for only a short time, and a lot of them said things like, I was only just starting to get comfortable that this money was coming. I had started to research going back to school. And so I think that's one of the reasons it's important to have mechanisms to support us that aren't vulnerable to the whims of political change.
Absolutely. And thank you, Sarah, for folding that in. One of the questions we had from YouTube is, where are these models working? And it is the sad truth that there have been many pilots across the globe over the years, that most of them end up getting cut off because of political change or unviable political situations. But we do have a lot of good data from them. And just as Sandino mentioned earlier, that people know how to spend this money, and the fact that it is cash and that it is unconditional, which is another important part of this idea of a basic income, is that there are no conditions on how you are able to spend the money, enable people to make choices that we might not think of if we ourselves are not living in poverty. And just a little bit of a story from Stockton, California, where the group that I work for, Economic Security Project, has partnered with the Mayor Michael Tubbs, to run a pilot of guaranteed income where folks in Stockton are getting $500 a month. One of the things that we've seen is, everyone's worried that people will stop working. And one of the kind of anecdotes is, yeah, some people have cut back on their hours because they were working 3 jobs to try to make ends meet, and so the fact that they might be working less than 3 jobs in order to spend more time with their family, is that does not sound like a negative to me. So I think it's really interesting to see the ways that when cash can intervene, it can free us up to make choices where we can then show up in our community in different ways. And I'm curious, Anne, if you have anything to say a little bit about that kind of community action, like in terms of, how could we act as citizens or show up for each other if we had this kind of, steady drumbeat of cash?
Well, I think it's a great question about how we can really think more about kind of a shared prosperity kind of economy, and one that is more built on community. I mean, I think right now what this moment is showing us is a level of mutual aid that perhaps we've never experienced. We work with a lot of communities who are talking about the fact that now people are utilizing their resources to show up for one another, and to help with food, to help take care of someone, a child when someone is working. And so I think, what does that help us understand about how we could be in community with one another in new ways? I think that cash gives us the ability to do that in more interesting ways than what we've seen before, and how we could actually work in community in different ways. Because folks are giving in so many ways. Certainly, we're experiencing unprecedented natural disasters and precarity, where people are showing up for one another, even those without a lot of resources. So imagine if we did have more stable resources, how we could be there for one another.
That's great. And I think maybe we can take a second more to touch on CirclesUBI and what it is and how it builds value in those community connections. So Sarah, if you want to talk us through that.
Yeah, for sure. So Circles is a community currency, and like most community currencies, it has, we're not redistributing any existing currency like euro. Euro is a currency that has value because the government gives it to us and says it does. Community currencies have value when communities use them. And I think maybe the most of the more well-known currency models that you might be familiar with that isn't a fiat model. Circles is maybe more related to a mutual credit system. So in a mutual credit system, people in a community take out small loans against each other. And eventually this forms sort of a complex web of many interconnected debts. And maybe we can think of that as being what a community is actually, much like a mutual aid network. It's all of these small debts and favors that we've all taken from one another and give to one another. And maybe just to plug some work that I really love from another recently departed great thinker, David Graeber, in his book Debt, talks about some of these ideas in detail in the way that money can build communities. So circles you might think of as when you sign up for circles, you make connections to people in your community who you trust. And you can think of that almost like pledging to pay them a basic income. This currency is minted to everyone in the system over time at an equal rate. So everyone who is part of it is receiving the same amount as everyone else. And in order to join, you have to be invited by 3 people who are already part of it. So it really flows outward through our sort of social relationships. The part of it that is most universal basic income like, and I'll use like super exaggerated numbers to make it more obvious, is say I join and Anne joins a year later. So when she joins, I have 10,000 circles, which is the name of the currency in our community, and she has 0. After 1 year, the way that it's being minted to everyone in the community is increasing over time. So you're getting more and more every day. It's really, really inflationary, which sounds crazy, but we think it might work. And so after our second year, even though I started with 10,000 and Anne started with 0, we've received each 1 million circles. So I have 1,010,000 and she has 1 million. So you can see that the relative difference between the amount of money we have has decreased. The earlier disparity has become negligible in terms of the amount we currently have. So this is what I mean when I say wealth disparity decreases over time, or you might say it really severely discourages hoarding.
That's so fascinating. And I love the idea of, value built within a community itself. And I think that that's something that just kind of a lot of us are experiencing right now, as Anne mentioned, when we're kind of relying on our communities to get us through something like the pandemic or any of the other crises that we're facing in the United States here today. Liv, I think one of the things that you touched on that I'd like to bring it back to is this idea that who can afford to be an artist, and how basic income can really challenge that and maybe be a meaningful intervention. So I'm kind of curious if you talk about that a little bit, and maybe we can all chime in.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think one of the big issues that we're facing in the arts is the sort of exceptionalism of who gets to be in and who gets to stay in once they are in. It can be quite the little clique. So it's about how do we encourage more and more people to take up artistic activity and then to continue with it as a career. And I think, one of the things that we struggle with often, because we are such a low income community, people say it to me all the time, why are you complaining about being poor when you knew you were going to be poor going into the arts? And it's just one of those things where you're kind of going, yeah, but I've trained really, really hard for about, 10 years and I have a decade of experience and yet I'm still earning like 15 grand a year. Is that okay with you? Because it's not okay with me. And particularly, I think when it comes to the soft power of the arts, and how certainly Ireland uses its cultural capital in a massive way in terms of global trade and such. And certainly I've toured all over the world sort of representing Ireland. So I sort of feel like I should get a little bit more in return. But it is a big challenge. And I think UBI would be something that would really, really help more people to participate in a big way or in a small way, that people can take on artistic activity kind of as a sideline if they wish, give them more time. I think, there's something, particularly time is such a big issue in the arts. 50% of an artist's workload is unpaid. So all of the time that we spend, that's not directly in a studio or on stage, or your work hanging on a gallery wall, we don't get paid for any of that. So UBI gives people the opportunity to have their time subsidized in some way. Artist time is the big hidden subsidy of the arts. So yeah, I think UBI would just be a great leg up. I think it was Philippe Van Parijs said, poverty is a net, and all we need is a floor to stand on. And I think being poor makes you more poor. So it's kind of that vicious cycle. So I just think it would be an extraordinary thing to welcome more people in, that more people feel that they can be involved and that they can participate. And I have a funny anecdote about, I had a meeting with, we had a meeting with the Minister for Finance in Ireland a couple of years ago, and it was on multi-annual funding. We were looking for just, set amounts of money over multiple years. So this is pre our UBI flag waving. And he said, well, how could I be sure that you would continue to work if I'd already promised you money for next year or the year after? And we were kind of like, well, of course we'd work, because we want to work, because this is vocational and we're absolutely not in this gig for the money. So he sort of laughed, but thankfully he's still the Minister for Finance, and we've been knocking on his door plenty over the last few years, and they now have a UBI trial in the programme for government. So fingers crossed, that'll be happening soon.
Yeah, I love what you said, which is that, we already know that art is undervalued in the marketplace, right? Like when you can't make a living as an artist, then we know that artists have already kind of jumped off that cliff, so to speak. And basic income really kind of challenging one of these fundamental tenets of capitalism, which is that you are only worth what your labor is worth in the marketplace, right? And saying, no, like actually, your worth is not derived from the value of your labor in the marketplace, but comes from somewhere else. I think that could be truly transformational for all sorts of people. And I would love to live in an art world where we have too much art and everybody's making things, and there's some other kind of filter for what we get to see, as opposed to the situation right now, which kind of what you said is a lot of invisible labor, is a lot of invisible privilege, invisible maybe generational wealth that allows you to kind of have some safety net from your family in order to pursue art as a career, and the potential that a basic income might have to hear from people who we might not otherwise hear from. I don't know if that kind of brings up anything for anyone else.
I'll jump in and say that, like Liv, I'm also would be excited for the Cambrian explosion of art following a real implemented universal basic income. But I do just want to say that I think it bears calling out entire industries also for the fact that being an artist right now is such an unviable financial proposition, that where we're looking at universal basic income as our best case scenario for solving it.
Absolutely. There are always structural things at play, which I think is one of the reasons we need a structural solution. Yeah, I don't know, Anne, if you want to talk a little bit about what you see working right now in terms of either policy or communities that are able to kind of implement these sorts of things to uplift each other.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, what I see is really important is people being able to do some of the things that we don't value. Obviously, like spend time with family, talking to people who say, you know, I was finally able to go to like a family funeral, which I've never been able to do, and take my kids to the ocean for the first time. To have those kinds of experiences. I mean, I think that what we're about to really see happen with COVID is knowing that some of the things that people relied on. I'm just thinking about what you just said about now being reliant on this kind of income when you were perhaps working in a job that now might be lost. It might be lost forever just to keep you going. Um, but I think that there's great potential for us to really rethink what a floor looks like, what this may mean for all of us going forward, and why it's so critical. Um, I mean, here in the States, it's um, you know, we see it as a badge, almost of a badge of honor to remain poor. That you have to kind of pay your debts. That living, from paycheck to paycheck has become so normalized. And do we have an opportunity now to turn that on its head? That's a question for us, right? If we can turn this on its head a little bit, and really speak to the ways that um, people are valued that have not been seen. Caretaking has not been valued. Spending time with family has not been valued. And does this give us an opportunity to actually turn that on its head? Is a question we all must face right now, and I think it's an important one that could change the trajectory of how we think about policy.
Absolutely. We have some questions from the comment section, one of which is, how do some of our friends here in Europe look at the differences between US and Europe in regards to a universal basic income? And maybe folded into that question is, what do you think of the kind of Silicon Valley framing of universal basic income?
Yeah, I can speak to particularly to seeing the Silicon Valley take of universal basic income. Having had the strange and surreal experience of talking to some VCs who are interested in universal basic income. I think that one of the things about UBI that is so fascinating, I'm often drawn to things that have this property actually, is that we see interest in it from all corners of the political spectrum. So though we have on this panel a bunch of like-minded people who are interested in UBI for the arts, there are other aspects of the conversation about UBI where people are interested in tightening government budgets by cutting other social programs to implement UBI. So when interacting with people from the tech industry, you never know which sort of realm of interest you're dealing with. And we here in this panel have sort of many differences between our projects and their implementation details, but there are many others. And I would also say that, interestingly though, one of the stories from the Silicon Valley narrative around UBI is very similar to the one we're telling about all of the exciting artwork that might get made if we had a UBI. They tell themselves stories about all of the exciting companies that might get founded if we had a UBI.
I mean, I think for the it actually helps, of course, when we have look at the Silicon Valley kind of narrative about the UBI. It's kind of a modern paint for our old house, and I think it's in a way helpful. But then there's always this element of you have to have the state, the government, who provides for UBI, and this I think is the case in not all of the countries for sure. And then it kind of comes back to us if we want to talk about equality, to see it also as a global problem, because there is this huge gap between the South and the North. This can be also within a country, but also on a global scale. And I think we shouldn't forget that the responsibility on the end is also individual responsibility, especially when it comes to equality. And sometimes with the UBI discussion, it goes really into more campaigning and political kind of discussions.
Yeah, I think that's so true, and absolutely, you know, just kind of pointing out that there's like smoothing that needs to happen on a global scale, I think is really powerful, because we already know that, you know, the countries that have the strongest social safety programs are the countries that are the most kind of homogenous, that look the most the same. I think, Liv, you're coming to us from Norway, which has a really strong social safety net and has just like started to really have to take a hard look at how it feels about immigration and interacting with that social net and what that looks like. And so I do think that, like, you know, if you can zoom out at the end of the day, when we talk about, again, back to these issues of deservedness and who deserves what and how we, what our rights are as human beings, first and foremost, that kind of helps eliminate this idea of the other. You know, like if we can all start off with these basic rights that that I don't deserve any more than you, and that we can kind of really take a look at these universal policies that might help us lift everybody, lift all boats. Any other thoughts, Liv, from across the pond?
Yeah, I mean, I guess from my experience, I think in Europe we rely more on government subsidy and government funding. There's not a huge culture of commercial or corporate sponsorship for the arts, and I think probably, I mean, certainly in Ireland, you know, we're a relatively small country, so our ability to engage directly with government is quite, I would say, relatively easy as a small population, and our access to our kind of government representatives is quite, you know, we're sort of only one step away from people, so we can literally go and knock on doors. So yeah, I think our relationship to government, I think certainly any sort of UBI will come via government channels as opposed to other means. Although those things, circles and things, sounds incredible. I love the sound of that. But yeah, I mean, it's a very different playing field in terms of, like, I mean, I know Norway spends about €400 plus per capita on arts spend, and I think the equivalent in the States is about $23. So it's quite significant in terms of government subsidy. And they already have, in some ways, sort of basic incomes in place through grants for artists in Norway and Sweden that lasts, I think, between 2 and 10 years, depending on how established you are. So yeah, I think there are different systems, and there's positives in different ways. But yeah.
Thank you. So we're just kind of gonna start winding down here. If you have any more questions, this last call, you can get into the comments section now. But I just wanted to take a minute to think a little bit about, I don't know, the idea of artists as citizens, and how art can kind of allow us to change some of these narratives, to participate in our government or our communities in different ways. And I think, you know, a basic income might really allow us to do that in a meaningful way as an arts community for the first time. I know that here in the Bay Area, a lot of my friends who are practicing artists, as we've mentioned, they have multiple jobs, and a lot of those jobs are in the service industry that have been, you know, they no longer are waiting tables. So they've lost their secondary incomes, and I've seen a lot of ingenuity in the space. Like, I think that there's a lot of promise in terms of what people are trying to do to get their art out there digitally during this time. But I also am dreaming of a world where people wouldn't have to worry about putting food on the table. I think we have one more question here. How do we get others to believe in our art and provide funding? Sometimes people don't see the importance. I think one idea would be that we don't, like, not that we don't need funding, but that the art itself has intrinsic value, and that maybe we should have systems to support artists from the bottom up. But does that ring any bells for anyone else?
I would say that it depends a lot on the specific type of art you make and the place you're calling in from.
Absolutely. Well, we're gonna wind down. I would love to go around and hear one thing people can do if they're interested in furthering a basic income where they live today. Sandino.
I think we should all participate in all possible projects we can, because I think also policy on the end needs good examples, not only smart narratives where people start seeing the actual advantage of it, but also having good examples which you can kind of use in order to influence good policy. And I think for this, we just have to all, in one way, it can be just working with an advocacy group or just participating in a social income project.
Thank you so much. Sarah?
Yeah, I would say first, thank you to all my fellow panelists and Cara for facilitating. I would encourage people watching who might be interested to follow the Circles project over the coming months. We have a lot of things launching in the next 6 weeks. And you can get Circles started in your own community. And we're going to be publishing after our launch guides on how we got it started here that you can implement too, hopefully.
Great. Liv?
I would say, for me, I would say the big thing is to equip ourselves with loads of research and knowledge because there's going to be a lot of naysayers against UBI. So reading up on as many examples and things as possible so we can back down any of those kind of the naysayers out there, and then speak to your politicians and really use your voices. That would be my big thing.
Anne?
I would say in the States here, we can't really move toward a greater UBI without dealing with anti-Black racism. And so I think it's so important for artists to be engaged in kind of cultural narrative shift. And I'd love to see more of that and it to be supported more by philanthropy and government.
Absolutely. And I was just going to end by saying that we have here in just the last month, the Mayors for Guaranteed Income initiative launched, which is 25 cities now across the country, everyone from Libby Schaaf in Oakland to Mayor Baraka in Newark, New Jersey, and all points in between. And so there really are kind of like local opportunities for you to talk to your local lawmakers and make a case for artists supporting basic income in your city. Thank you guys so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Thanks to all the panelists, to the UNIC partners, the grid, for putting this all together. And from Gray Area, we're happy to help support and know about all of these sorts of projects. So if anyone has ideas out there, don't hesitate to reach out. Good night and good luck.